In this video, we are going to deep dive into Sevalla's networking and domain management capabilities. I am going to show you how to configure every aspect of networking for your applications, from internal connections to custom domains, CDN setup, and advanced security configurations. So let's get started. In Sevalla, networking is how applications communicate with other applications, databases, or object storage, or any other external services. And for that, there are primarily two networking approaches, and understanding the difference between them is very important. The first is public networking. Now, public networking involves connections that are accessible from the internet or any other external networks. When your application uses public networking, data makes an internet round trip, which means that it travels outside Sevalla's infrastructure and comes back. So that is a round trip which goes beyond the Kubernetes cluster, the GCP networking, the nodes, etc. And this is typically slower than private networking, but it's also necessary when you are trying to connect to external services or when you need public access. So with Sevalla's application hosting, you can connect to your application publicly using specific ports. For example, the default port is, of course, the 8080, which Sevalla exposes that we saw in the previous video, but it can be configured from port 1 to 65535. And same way, you can also use TCP proxies if you want any kind of non-HTTP traffic, for example, databases and all. Similarly, for private networking, it keeps connections within Sevalla's network infrastructure, which means the Google Cloud, the Kubernetes cluster, and the Cloudflare network, the whole Sevalla's own infrastructure. It does not contain the outside or the external networks. The data, it never leaves Sevalla's environment, the secure environment that it has created. The result is the data transfer is significantly faster as compared to external networks or public networking. And the second thing is it is also secure, since data never leaves or external request never comes from outside. And this is usually the recommended method when you are trying to connect applications hosted on Sevalla and you are trying to link applications with databases, object storage. As we saw in the last video, we connected our application to a Redis instance using internal connection. One important point to remember about the internal networking is when you're trying to establish an internal networking between your application and your database or your object storage, both of them should use the same data center in the same region. Otherwise, the connection is not possible. You cannot really create internal connections between different services which are in different geographic locations. That is physically not possible. To configure any kind of changes in your application regarding networking, you can come to your application dashboard and you can access this networking tab, this whole networking page that is dedicated to any kind of network related changes that we are going to cover. What are the options that we have available here? Let's start with the protocol configuration that we have here, the edit protocol. Inside this public networking section, you'll find this button which is called edit protocol. By default, applications use HTTP protocol, but you can switch to gRPC. What is gRPC? If you have never used gRPC, it is mostly used in the context of microservices. But gRPC is basically a high performance protocol that allows browser-based applications to connect to gRPC over HTTP protocol. Now, this enables different parts of an application or even different applications to communicate over a network. But the difference between HTTP and gRPC is the serialization and deserialization format. So gRPC uses a format called protobuf, which is extremely fast as compared to our traditional JSON based serialization and deserialization. So that is one distinct thing to keep in mind. So if you want to change the protocol, if you want to make use of gRPC, then you can click on edit protocol, and here you have the option of selecting if you want it. And you can click on update and your changes will be reflected in your network. The second thing that we have here is the edit port button. And if you click on it, we can see that the default port is 8080. Every application that we have in Sevalla, it has a default port of 8080. For the web process, the primary process that we talked about in the previous video, And when it is deployed, your application becomes reachable. You can reach your application over the internet, of course, through port 80 or port 443. Port 80 is basically the HTTP port, and same way port 443 is associated with the port with the HTTPS protocol. And so automatically routes all these traffic to your container based on the port that you have defined. You can configure any port that you want to expose, but there are some restrictions. If we come to the docs, here it is mentioned that you can use any port that you want, but these are the ports that you cannot use. These are restricted for Sevalla's own use, and you're not allowed to use them. But otherwise, you have thousands of ports available for you if you want to customize that. And the last thing that we have available is here the disable button, because sometimes you might want to disable all HTTP or HTTPS traffic for your web process. This might be useful for applications that only communicate through TCP proxies or internal connections. So you can go ahead and disable that, and that will make your application more suited to your use case and more secure, of course, since it is not exposed to the internet. Next part that we have here is in the public networking section is the IP restrictions. IP restrictions are a powerful security feature which allows you to restrict or block access to some specific IP addresses, so that when an unauthorized user attempts to access your application, they'll receive a forbidden error with the status code of 403. So there are a couple of options that we have available here. Primarily, no IP restriction, which is the default state, which means all the connections are allowed. The second thing is IP allow list. If we click on this, it means that we only allow specific IP addresses to access our application. There are no limitations here. You can add as many addresses as possible, and only those IP addresses will be allowed to access our application. The same way, we also have a deny list, which works the same way, but in the opposite way. We are allowing all the connections to our application except for these IP addresses that we are blocking. Then the next part that we have available here is CDN and edge caching. Sevalla provides a premium CDN, which is of course powered by Cloudflare itself, the Cloudflare's vast network of CDN nodes. And it is of no cost. You are not really charged for any of the CDN based use cases. You get all the enterprise level features, things like DDoS protection, which means if for some reason you are the target of some wide scale attack, a lot of nodes from all over the world, a lot of computers, a lot of devices are sending traffic to your server so that your server crashes, then in that kind of scenarios, Cloudflare's network will try to absorb that traffic and your servers will be secure. So by default, you get DDoS protection because CDN and edge caching is provided by Cloudflare in Sevalla. Same way, Cloudflare also provides you firewall to restrict and stop malicious traffics. Malicious in the sense Cloudflare regularly monitors malicious and harmful traffic over the internet, and it has the detected patterns, and when it detects something similar for your servers, then it will stop them. You'll also get HTTP 3 based high performance networking. By default, the CDN is not enabled. You can click on this and you can turn the CDN status on if you want. When you turn this on, all your applications assets, the static assets, whatever it has available, they will be cached in Cloudflare servers, the CDN servers, right? And when I say static assets, compressed format like zip files or audio files, MP3 or OGG, WAV formats, or videos, MKV videos, MP4 videos, images, any kind of images, documents, or web assets. If we are serving any kind of web application, then the static assets of that, which is primarily HTML files and JavaScript files and CSS files, those things will be cached in the CDN server, so that whenever any user from all over the world, they send a request to our application, they will get a response from a CDN, which is much, much faster than getting a response from the original server. We also have an edge caching mechanism, edge caching feature, which is also provided by Cloudflare workers. Now, CDN typically caches our static assets and it serves our static assets, which are usually images or CSS or JavaScript from global locations. But edge caching, if you want to differentiate between CDN and edge caching, it saves the site, the whole page in Cloudflare's global network, even for dynamic content. CDN will only serve static content, but if you have edge caching enabled, then some of your pages will get cached in the Cloudflare's network using Cloudflare workers when you turn on the edge caching. You can also go ahead and enable this. If you want, you can at any point of time, you can click on purge cache, which will clear all the cache from all the CDN nodes so that you get fresh content. Using CDN and edge caching gives a lot of advantages. You get things like beyond the obvious advantages, which are like the latency will be much smaller, the load on your server, because most of the static responses will be served from the CDN nodes. Your server will get less amount of traffic, less amount of processing, which will save you cost and also the processing power. In turn, the user experience will also improve. You'll get improved SEO. You'll get much better ranking in search results, in Google search results. And lastly, let's talk about TCP proxy a little. TCP proxy is a feature which allows you to expose a non-HTTP traffic publicly. And usually when we say non-HTTP traffic, we mean TCP. And it might be useful for services like any kind of databases or external services. For example, you have databases, MongoDB database, or RabbitMQ, which is a queue processor, or WebSocket service, or custom TCP based application if you are building some kind of gaming application which uses custom TCP protocols, or any kind of gaming servers, or IoT device based communications. All these use cases might require TCP based connections, TCP based proxy. So you can use this for that kind of use cases. Usually you'll not need this, but it is there if you need them. The next section we have is the private networking. Now, as I have already said, some of the advantages, some of the pros of using private networking is you get faster connections because there is no internet round trip. Everything is happening inside Sevalla's infrastructure. Second thing is enhanced security. The traffic, the data never actually leaves Sevalla's infrastructure. So you get security right out of the box. The next thing is you are not charged for any bandwidth inside the internal network. This is a huge win because if your application, your databases, your object storage, everything is deployed in Sevalla, then you can save a lot of cost this way. In the next section, we have a capability so that we can expose a port, and you might need it. For example, if you have a microservices architecture, or if you have services which requires some kind of internal network accessibility, then you can expose a port internally for another application. So you can just select your process and add a port, any random port, and you can expose it. After you expose it, you have to deploy your application and your network will be ready. And finally, in the connected services, we can see that visually in the dashboard, we had connected our web process to our Redis instance, but you can do the same thing from the networking tab, and by clicking on add connection, you can select, and you have two options of adding an external connection to your primary process. That's pretty much all the networking option that we have available in the Sevalla dashboard for your applications. The next thing that I want to talk about is domains. It's very important because when you deploy your application to Sevalla, by default, you get a free domain, which is this part. Whatever comes before .sevalla.app, this is the domain you get, which is randomly generated domain. And if you visit this, you can access your application, which is here, right? And this is not supposed to be used permanently. This is provided to you so that you can test your application. You can review your application for pull requests and those use cases. But this is not supposed to be permanent. For production instances, we'll have to add custom domains. Let's see how we can add a custom domain to our application. So the first requirement for adding custom domain is you cannot have a custom domain added if you are in the hobby tier. You have to upgrade to at least S1 so that we can add custom domain. So let's go to processes, web process, click on update process, and we'll increase it to S1. and click on update, and we have to deploy our changes so that a new instance is assigned to our application. So I'll click on deploy changes. It might take a few minutes and we'll wait for that. And after a few seconds, we can see that our deployment is successful. And our instance, if we go to processes, we can see that our current instance size is S1 now, which has 0.5 cores of CPU and 1 GB of RAM. Now, if you go to domains, we get the option of adding our own custom domain. So for this, let's click on add domain. Here we need to add the domain name. Let's say we want the name next.seamlessly.xyz. I'm trying to assign a subdomain to my primary domain, which is srineshli.xyz. And let's click on add domain. In the next screen, we'll get these values, which we have to paste in our domain management system or our domain registrar, so that Sevalla can verify the ownership of our domain. It can verify that whether we own these domain or not. So let's just copy paste all these values. The first thing is you have to add a text record with this name and this value. We copy this. In my case, my domain registrar is Namecheap. So I'll add a new record, which is text. The host is the value I copied, and the value will be this. And we also need to add another record, which is also a text record. The name will be this and the value will be this. After adding these two records, let's click on save all changes. And after this, it might take some time for this to reflect everywhere, and before we can see the results here. It will keep checking it in real time. As we can see from these loaders, it is continuously checking whether we have added these records in our domain register or not. If we have added, we will be able to go to the next step. And if you have added your records appropriately, after a few minutes, it might take 5 to 10 minutes, then you should land on this screen, which asks you to finally add the A record, which basically specifies the IP that you have to add. So let's just add that and we'll be done with our custom domain configuration. We'll copy this part and add a new record, which will be an A record. The name will be this and the IP will be this. And let's click on save. And finally, if everything has gone right, you should see the screen which says you have been able to successfully configure your custom domain in Sevalla, right? Let's close this, and it says that our custom domain is active. Let's try accessing our application in this domain. And the first time we land here, we might get an error like this, because domain configurations, they take a few minutes and sometimes hours to propagate across the whole world. So you might not see the results instantly. You might not see your site working instantly, but let's just wait a few minutes and we can verify whether it worked or not. And that's pretty much all for this video. We have covered the complete networking and domain management system in Sevalla. Some of the key points to remember is, first, use private networking for internal service communication. Reserve public networking for external integrations. Always place connected services in the same data center. For performance, enable CDN for all applications with static assets. Use edge caching for dynamic content performance. Monitor cache hit rates, add performance. And for security, implement IP restrictions for sensitive applications. Use private networking to minimize the attack surface, and regularly review your connected service and permissions.